Hello, everyone. It is good to be here. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat today. I have a few topics I'll talk about, but if there's questions, I'll deal with the questions. Servanus and Derek, thank you for commenting. Glad to see you guys were here. I see we have a few more people in the chat. Let me know if you can't hear me well. I'll try to adjust if there's an issue, but I tried to make everything right on my end from the beginning. So I guess to start with, until I see comments, I'll start by talking about what my planned reading is for the next month. Revan, we got some comments. Revan says, "Hey man, unfortunately can't stick around long, but I'll be here for a few minutes." Oh, great to see you, man. Good to see you. Dizzy Dale says, hello, Dizzy Dale. Good to see you. So I have a video coming out on Monday talking about my my July TBR, and it's actually lower than my June TBR, but it's still quite a lot. June, I was able to get a ton done. I was able to read 15 books in June, and I was that amounts to about 6,000 pages, which is in my top 2 months of all time. Lisa, great to see you. Hello. And so I had a great month in June, and mostly because I was able to, I didn't have work because I had the month off of work. And so I really put time into that. I also put time into making videos, like ranking videos. And if you like videos, things like that. Hello, that one guy named Ramy. Good to see you. Dizzy says 15. Dang, yeah. I usually am around 8 to 12 is my usual fluctuation. So no Edit Book Reviews, great to see you. Okay, congratulations on 3,000. More people need to discover this guy. Oh, thank you. No Edit Book Reviews, that's very nice. More people need to see your channel. No Edit Book Reviews does book reviews of nonfiction books primarily on his channel, and it's really good, so you should check it out. But I was able to get about 6,000 pages read, and it puts me at just about 70 books for the year so far, which is good because it puts me a little bit ahead of where I wanted to be, so that when the school starts, I'll be able to focus on school and not as much on reading. And I've already banked up a lot of videos, and I was able to do non-book review videos as well. My non-book review videos, I have one on if you like this expanded universe novel for Star Wars, read this canon novel. I also have if you like this Star Wars authors, Star Wars novels, read their non-Star Wars books, and I have recommendations there. I also have a video talking about all my books for Michael Stackpole and ranking his Star Wars books, as well as a Star Trek video doing an all my books for Dayton Ward. I have some videos on Dragon Con coming up, and I have a few other videos that I'm planning. Revan says, between adding The Hobbit and about half of Arcane and Unbounded to June, I got to around 3,000 pages. I rarely get that high. I know you're usually around the 2,000 to 2,500 mark, so that's really good for you, Revan. Johan says, congratulations, Jonathan. I admire your dedication and love your enthusiasm. Oh, that's so kind, Johan. Thank you so much. That's very kind of you. And so I have a lot of those kind of fun videos. I also was able to do a top 10 science fiction novels of all time, which that'll be coming out later this year, and a few more. So I really took the time. I've really been working hard. I'm reading Harry S. Wong's First Days of School in preparation for next year. I want to make sure I'm out of the gate ready for school next year. And I'm also doing some prep work. July, I won't read as much because I'll be doing that prep work a little bit. So unless there are any questions, which of course, if you're just joining us, leave your questions in the chat or your comments or, whatever. And so in July, I'll be reading the Trouble on Cloud City. And I just realized this is backwards, but Trouble on Cloud City from Star Wars. I'll be reading a Star Trek book, My Enemy, My Ally by Diane Duane. I'll be reading Star Trek Klingon, which originally was a CD-ROM game that I read that they turned into a novelization, and so I'll be reading that. And then this also has some background material. And then I don't have a physical copy of it, but the new Star Wars Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. So that's all my tie-in books. Then I have a science fiction book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, the second book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. I'll be reading that. I also have Catherine Arden's Dead Voices. I read the first Small Spaces book, and it'll be that one should be on the channel, that review soon. I also have The Faded Sky, which is the second book in the Lady Astronaut series, The Calculating Stars being the first book that was really good. I also have Fragments by Dan Wells. Read his first book, Partials. That book review should be up soon, and it was delightful. And then Night Watch, which is by Tim Akers, a new fantasy novel with a nice pun in the title. And then I interviewed this author for a collection of short stories she did, and that is Jane Linscold. She wrote Library of the Sapphire Wind. And so I picked up this book because I was interested in it. And then sometimes I've had months in the past where I just keep pushing back my plans. It's just because it's just hard to get to everything. And so I did this once with Dragons of Autumn Twilight. I actually I had it on my TBR for like 3 months straight in 2021, and I just kept pushing it back and eventually just fell off the list. Well, so far, this book has been pushed back 3 times, and that is The Towers of the Sunset by L.E. Modesitt Jr. It's the second book in his Saga of Recluse. And I was going to read this in April, didn't get to it. Or sorry, no, not April. I was going to read it in May, didn't get to it. Then I was going to read it in June, just didn't get to it. I put other books ahead on that list. And then in July, I'll read this. So let's see. I have that one guy named Rami says, "Oh yeah, congrats on 3,000 subs. Thank you. Discovering you was part of my inspiration for why I got into reading." Oh, that's great. I hope. Let me know what you're reading now. I'm glad more people are able to get into reading. Lazy Fishy says, "Hey Jonathan, how are you doing? I just started New Jedi Order, and I'm about to start Dark Tide to Ruin. I'm really enjoying the series. Oh, New Jedi Order is great. The Dark Tide stuff is great by Michael Stackpole. Those were sadly his last Star Wars books. After that, he left. But it's really interesting, the behind the scenes, that he was one of the architects of the New Jedi Order at the beginning, not at the end, but for the beginning of it. And it was funny because when they switched over from Bantam books to Del Rey, none of the Del Rey authors had read the upcoming Bantam books because they weren't out yet. But because Michael Stackpole was previously working with Bantam, he actually had already read the books. So he was the one person on staff that knew everything that was happening in the books. And so he was able to guide things along. And he was one of the architects of why they killed spoiler character that I find so interesting. No Edit Book Review says, "Me too. I'm almost done listening to Vector Prime. Oh, I hope you review it on your channel, No Edit Book Reviews. That'd be great. I know you'd mostly do nonfiction on there, but I'd love to see you review it." And Revan says, "I've been working on New Jedi Order myself. Gonna read Star by Star this month." I can't wait to talk to you about Star by Star. Lazy Fishy says, "The way they let Han deal with the event is really well written." Exactly. Yes, that is probably the best part of the first Dark Tide book is Han's storyline. Han is written terrific there. The best part of the second book for me is the action sequence, the big event at the end, which I thought was really good. And that one guy named Raimi says, "Right now I'm reading Labyrinth of Evil. James Luceno is my favorite Star Wars author." He's definitely up there. He has earned his place in the upper echelons because he wrote some great New Jedi Order books. He wrote Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. He wrote some like kind of prequel-ish books with Cloak of Deception, which was great. And he wrote Labyrinth of Evil, and then he wrote Darth Plagueis, which is the book of his that everyone loves. And then in the canon, he wrote Tarkin, and he wrote Catalyst. And Catalyst, I think, is his best book. That is a terrific book, so it's really well done. Dizzy Dale says, "Favorite Star Wars character." Well, if we're limiting it to the book characters, by far it's Thrawn. He would be number one by far. But if we're expanding it, that it can be characters from outside of the books, I would include who would I include? I would include Qui-Gon as one of them, and then I'd also include Ahsoka. Those would be my two, Qui-Gon and Ahsoka. Let's see. Kevin, thank you for being here. Kevin says, I just read my first Star Wars book, the first Thrawn Ascendancy book. Loved it. Just ordered the rest of the series. I'm glad you enjoyed it. That is quite the first Star Wars book because it is nothing like traditional Star Wars books. The Thrawn Ascendancy series is very much written to be kind of a standalone science fiction storytelling that happens to have the character of Thrawn, who's in a bunch of other Star Wars books, set in the Ascendancy before he came over to the main Star Wars universe. And so it's totally different. It reads more like not just a Star Trek book, but there's like a science fiction book that Timothy Zahn, because he writes a lot of science fiction outside of Star Wars. It reads more like one of those than it does his traditional Star Wars books, but it's still superb and fantastic. So I still recommend that book. I think that whole trilogy is great. The ending, ooh, man, that ending is so good. Revan says the Han stuff in the first Agents of Chaos book is excellent as well. Yes, he really gets to shine in the first one. In the second one, I think Lucino dropped the ball a little bit, but the first Agents of Chaos book is really good. Book with many covers. Hello, thank you for being here. Says good evening, fellow bookish people. Is that, I don't know if that's a reference to hello, fellow kids, where they have the older guy looking like younger kids. But yeah, great to see you. Book with many covers. Glad to have you here. Let's see. I also, in addition to reading these books in July, I'm also working with Bandcamp, and then I'm also going to be trying to bank up even more videos and prepare stuff for Dragon Con, because I actually want to do stuff at Dragon Con this year, not just kind of be here. Revan says, I forgot, have you read Mistborn Secret History? I read it last night and it was wild. I have not. Revan, I have Arcanum Unbounded right here, and I will read it eventually. And I've read one of the novellas from it already separately, which was Emperor's Soul, which I feel mixed about. But I will read Secret History eventually. Unfortunately, I already know what happens in Secret History because I had to look it up when I was reading another Cosmere novel, because I was like, who is this referencing? And then it said who it's referencing, and I was like, how's that possible? That makes no sense. And then it said, well, if you've read Secret History, you'll know why. And I was like, well, darn, now I know what happens in Secret History. But I still will read it. I'll still read it because I'm sure it's going to be entertaining. I've been following you as you post them on your Twitter, just like as the little snippets of reviews. Book with many covers says happy to be here. Dizzy Dale says any 4th of July 4th plans. We will probably, with my family, my parents and my brother and my grandparents, will probably all go out, and we'll probably do some barbecuing, some food on the grill. We'll probably in our neighborhood, people set off fireworks everywhere around our neighborhood, and we never leave the neighborhood because we're like, I'll just sit outside and watch them all. So we won't go anywhere, like go to a special show, because we'll see it all around our neighborhood. But that's probably it. We'll probably get some reading in, that type of thing. But that's about it for July 4th plans. Lisa says, getting ready to start Jedi Bounty number 10 in the Young Jedi Knights series. Enjoying the series very much, and understand why our sons loved them so much when they were young. Yes, Kevin Anderson has, and so does Rebecca Mesta, who wrote the series with him, they have a great understanding of what younger Star Wars readers want, and also have a great way of connecting to older readers too. The books are just the right length. They tell just the right story. There's a lot of deeper themes. There's a lot of good life lessons in the books, and they're just super entertaining. Now Jedi Bounty gets a little dark in some places. I was a little surprised at what they were able to get away with in that book, but it's still really good, and it's a superb lead up to the final book, which I believe the next book is The Emperor's Plague, which is like ends that whole sequence of books, because they did 6 books, then 5 books, then 3, and that ends the 5-book sequence. And really, I think they should have ended it after The Emperor's Plague. But maybe I'll feel differently after I read Trouble on Cloud City again this month. Dizzy Dale says, cool, hope you have fun. Yes, I hope I have fun this July 4th too. Lazy Fishy says, wait, is it already a year since the last time that you went to Dragon Con? I remember the streams around that time. Yeah, it happens every, like, the end of August, beginning of September. It happens every Memorial Day weekend. And so it's time to go back again. back when I lived in Virginia, I was able to go to multiple conventions because you'd have stuff. They'd have conventions in Richmond, and you'd have some in Raleigh, and you'd have some in even some in Lynchburg, where I lived. And so it was easier to get to conventions and go to multiple conventions a year. And I live just outside of Atlanta, and so now it's possible that I could go to multiple conventions, but a lot of the Atlanta conventions, I'm just not interested. And the rest of the conventions are just far away in Florida or in Alabama. They're just far enough away that it's not worth it for me to go. So it's really just Dragon Con at the moment. And so last year I went for a single day. I packed in everything in a day. I met all the authors, went to 3 panels, got to see the sites. I did all of that in a single day. I got there at like 8 a.m. right when they opened, and I was there until I want to say it was like 11 p.m. So I've had a full day of Dragon Con last year. And so this year my plan is to go 2 days, to go Friday and Saturday, because I have 17 authors and editors that I want to meet. So that's quite a lot of people to meet. And so this year I'm trying to do 2 days, Friday and Saturday, and I'll try to go to more panels, go to meet more authors, get more books signed, things like that. A lot of the authors are the same authors as last year, and all the books are signed. So I'll just go to their panels. But then the new authors, I'll try to go to their actual book signings, and all that stuff. So Tim G says, "Do you live alone?" No, I live with my brother. My older brother is a music pastor and also does music business stuff, and so he and I have the same apartment. We use the studio, although I use the studio a lot more than he does. We call it the Conservatory. Um, let's see. That one guy named Raimi. While reading Star Wars novels or any novel in general, do you listen to the audiobooks? If yes, do you have a favorite narrator? The answer is no. I don't listen to audiobooks. I don't do any ebooks or audiobooks. It's physical copies only. That's my rule. Physical copies only, which is why I have to have so many physical books with me. Occasionally, I will do a reread of a book that is like a book I've already read in print. I'll reread it in audiobook format. And those are only for my absolute favorites. Like I loved that book and I'm just doing an audiobook just for fun. But it's very rare. I do that like once a year, maybe twice a year. And I really only do it with like Brandon Sanderson novels and maybe a Star Trek novel or a Star Wars novel, but not often. That being said, I have listened to some of the voices. Obviously, Mark Thompson is the best, but he has the most experience with the Star Wars novels. He's done the most audiobooks for them. I do like Jonathan Davis. I think he does a good job. January Lavoie, I haven't listened to as much from her, but from what I have listened to, she's pretty good. And that really is the big 3. I know some other have done it over the years, and I know that even for the young adult books, like they got Ashley Eckstein for Ahsoka, and they got Kat Tabor, who voiced Padme and the Clone Wars. Mark Thompson, January Lavoie, and Jonathan Davis. So let's go to the next one. Book with many covers says, "I am envious of you guys with the big over the big pond with all your conventions." Well, I mean, yeah, but there's still enough space around me that it's hard to get to the others now where I live. I'd have to either fly or drive and stay overnight and stuff, and it's just so I really just have the one now. I keep hoping every year that they're going to bring Star Wars Celebration to Atlanta, but they never do. They've gone to Florida, that's the closest, but never to Atlanta. Revan says, "Gotta go." Oh, good to see you, Revan. And another Revan Reborn says, "Hey, Jonathan, how are you? I'm currently reading the EU novel Tales of Mos Eisley Cantina, and it's amazingly underrated." Yes, I just purchased that a couple months ago. It's right here on my shelves, right here. And I intend to read it eventually, probably when I'm done with the Young Jedi Knights. Short story collections are harder for me to get into, but sometimes I really enjoy them. And since I love Kevin so much as a writer, I'm sure I'll love his edited stuff. And a lot of classic EU authors got their start in that short story collection. And it's a classic. Like everyone knows that. And Tales from Jabba's Palace are 2 of the best collections of Star Wars stories ever. So I'm glad you're enjoying it. Jeremy says, "Love all your videos. Thanks for giving me so many good Star Trek recommendations." Oh, thank you. I'm trying to read more. I haven't read all of them. People will say, "You've read so many of the Star Trek books," and I say, "Okay, there are 800 Star Trek books and counting. I've read 100 of them." And they're like, "What?" So I am not. I barely scratched the surface of Star Trek novels, but I'm glad I'm getting more people into them. Book with many covers says, "Congrats on 3,000. By the way, I just hit my first 100. So way to go yet." Well, congrats hitting for 100. It's a big milestone. It's a big deal. I remember at the beginning, it felt like anytime I got a subscriber, I was shocked and I was so happy at the beginning. So just keep working at it, and you'll continue to grow, I'm sure. Lazy Fishy says, "Which Legends books do you still need to read?" So there are, if we're just talking about adults Legends novels, because if we go into young adult and middle grade and kids books, that's a whole can of worms. Just about the adult books, I've read about 115 of them, and there's 150 total. So that puts me at about 35 that I have remaining. The biggest chunk that I have remaining is the Fate of the Jedi series, which I just recently purchased in paperback, wonderful copies. And the first book I plan to read probably in August or September, depending on when that all works out. And once I read through that, that will like knock me down substantially in what I have left reading in the EU. And then other than that, it's mostly standalone novels here or there, a trilogy here maybe, but it's mostly standalones that I'll have left after that. Book with Many Covers says, "Are you looking forward to watching the new Ahsoka series?" Of course, of course. Dave Filoni is a fantastic producer. I love his work. I grew up with the Clone Wars and with Rebels when I was in my preteens and teenage years, so I loved his stuff then. I've loved his stuff in The Mandalorian. I've loved his stuff in Book of Boba Fett. I think he's a great producer. And he just writes the type of stories I want to see. And also, I'm a big fan of Ahsoka and Thrawn, as I mentioned earlier. Those are two of my favorite characters. So I love those characters. So yes, I'm very excited for Ahsoka. I'm curious to see how much of it is a deviation from the Heir to the Empire storyline, how much of it is original, how much is an amalgam of the two. Because I never expected it to be a one-for-one adaptation, and I also never expected it to be a wholly original. I expected him to pull bits and pieces. So I'm really excited to see how that works out. I know a few people online that are not happy that he's pulling from Heir to the Empire, but I am excited because I love that series. So, where was I? That one guy named Raimi says, "Have you read or played The Force Unleashed 2? My video game playing is incredibly limited. I played the Lego games when I was a kid, and as an adult, I tried out the Battlefronts, and they just weren't for me. And I'm currently working through the Star Wars game KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, and I'm mainly doing that because my friend is guiding me through it. I'm just doing it just to experience the story, but I'm not a gamer. I'm not a big fan of games necessarily. So because of that, I haven't gotten into them much. I believe I watched some playthrough of The Force Unleashed before, and I read the first book, but I've never played the second game or read the second book. But I will one day because I intend to. That's one of those Legends novels left on my list. So let's see. Mangeno, I'm Alex. I'll call you Alex. Says, "Hello there. Glad to see you." Revan Reborn says, "What are your biggest questions or thoughts going into Phase 3 of the High Republic?" Okay, so first of all, they need to do a good job of tying the first two phases, explaining why they turned fully into the Nile, why the Path of the Open Hand did that. They also have to explain more of Martian Ro's endgame. I understand generally what he's doing, but I need to see his endgame. Secondly, they need to make it cleaner and clearer what the plot lines are. They need to, I mean, in my opinion, they need to have all the middle grade stuff be in the middle grade stuff, and all the young adult stuff in the young adult novels, and the adult stuff in the adult novels, and maybe reference other things, but don't jumble the characters like they did Phase 1. That was the biggest problem of Phase 1, was jumbling the characters. In Phase 2, they did a good job of keeping everything in its lane, and so it actually flowed a lot better as a phase, even though I enjoyed the books from Phase 1 better. So I'm hoping that they'll make it more flow and in their proper lanes better. That's my hopes. I also really want to make sure or see how they're going to set up, because the Jedi change in 200 years between the Phase 3 of the High Republic and also in the prequel era, there's a big change in what the Jedi are doing. So I'd like to see us move towards that change. And then also I want to see what's the setup for Acolyte. We know that Acolyte takes place years later after the High Republic, but there's some character setup, some plot stuff that will be connected. So I'm interested to see how they'll set that up if they are. So those are my thoughts on it. Lazy Fishy says, I hope they pull some stuff from the Thrawn trilogy. Me too. Me too. Book with many covers says, showing my age now, but I was 9 when the very first Star Wars film came out. I pestered my brother to take me, and I have loved Star Wars ever since. That is showing your age. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. That is an experience. I always talk about when I was in college, they like to do the game of, all right, if you could time travel to any point in history, where would you go? And people would give all these random answers. I always gave April of 1977, so I could see Star Wars in the theater and I could read The Sword of Shanra right when it came out, because they both came out around April to May 1977. And so that's my answer for that. It used to be. Now I have different answers. But that's really cool that you got to experience it. Nerd Book Review says, I think they showed a Ysalamiri in the trailer. I'm not sure if that's a Salamiri. Maybe it is, but I'm not sure. They did what's interesting is in Rebels, when they were making Rebels, they put artwork and stuff of the Salamiri behind Thrawn in some scenes. And at Celebration in 2016, Filoni said, yeah, we're taking Thrawn, but we're not exactly porting everything over, and we're not exactly using the Salamiri in that way. So I don't even know if they're going to actually use them, but if they do, it'll be really entertaining. Alex says, have you ever read the New Jedi Order, or is that something you're getting into? Nope, I've read the entire New Jedi Order, all the novels in that. Loved them. There are some that I love more than others. I particularly loved the Greg Keyes duology, The Edge of Victory, and then I also really enjoyed Balance Point, and I really enjoyed Aaron Alston's first book that he wrote for the series. And then I also really liked Unifying Force. I thought Unifying Force was really good. Those were my favorites in there. Lisa DW says, I was 16, have been a fan ever since. It's my husband and all 3 grown sons. Oh, that's wonderful, Lisa. That's wonderful that you've been a fan for that long. Lazy Fishy says, I was 1 when Revenge of the Sith came out. Yeah, I was not born when Phantom Menace came out. I was in utero when Phantom Menace came out. That tells you my age. Alex says Traitor was my favorite. I know everyone says that Traitor is their favorite New Jedi Order book. That is my least favorite New Jedi Order book because of how dark it is. I do not like Matthew Stover when he just gets super dark. That's why I didn't like Traitor. I also didn't like Shatterpoint for the same reason. It's just something about it. But if you liked it, that's really wonderful. It's great if you enjoyed it. It's just did not work for me in its style. And also it was very it was cut off from everything because it was just Jason and you had the other Yuuzhan Vong there, but there was no other of our main characters, which is a cool idea, but it's not. It just didn't work for me. That's why I much prefer this. If you're talking about structure of a story, that's why I prefer the Aaron Alston books, because it's more of strategy and politics and planning and recovering from Star by Star and all that stuff. So, Kai says favorite Star Wars book. We always get that. So if we're talking about no matter what what timeline, my favorite Star Wars novel is Kenobi by John Jackson Miller. And all of a sudden I'm realizing I put that somewhere and I have no idea where I put it. But Kenobi by John Jackson Miller is my favorite. And then if we're talking about other series, we're probably I really like the New Jedi Order and also the original Thrawn trilogy. And then if we're talking about canon, it's Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. That one is just fantastic. So let's see where in the next stuff is. Lisa says, as proved by everyone here, Star Wars is engaging to all ages. Yes, it is, which is why it's so successful. They talk about you have to make, for big blockbuster franchises, you have to have 4-quadrant appeal. And that includes men under the age of 25 and men over the age of 25, women under the age of 25 and women over the age of 25. under and over. So if you have those 4 quadrants, you really have solid storytelling, and Star Wars obviously has that. Certain other franchises are struggling because they think they have that and they actually don't, and they need to recognize you have to be focused on the ones that are actually there for you. Not going to name names yet. Let's see. Lazyfish says, I love the dark stuff. Darth Bane fan here. Exactly. Everyone's on one of the most common comments I got when I ranked some EU novels and series was, where's the Darth Bane trilogy? And I was like, well, it obviously didn't make my top 5 since it's not on here. Revan Reborn says, did you enjoy the Old Republic novel Annihilation? Yes, I did. I did enjoy it. It is one of those books that didn't stick with me. It didn't have moments that I was super excited about, moments that really grabbed me, really made me invested. It was just that was a fun read. That was good. I like the connections to other books like Revan and some of the Old Republic storytelling, but it just didn't particularly grab me. Let's see. Alex says, I prefer character moments over. Let's see. Sorry, I jumped. I prefer character moments over action because I find it hard to imagine action scenes. I get that. I get that. Action works for me when you're doing like hand-to-hand combat or like with lightsabers in Star Wars. But when it comes to like space, like the ships, that action does not work well. I really like ship battles on screen, but ship battles in books, it just is not my jam. And which is why you'd think I wouldn't enjoy the X-Wing novels. But I think that the character stuff in the X-Wing novels is good enough for that. Let's see. Thanks. Book with many covers says, thanks for making me feel really old now. Yeah, I'm sorry. Jason's is responding to someone else saying what's my favorite novel, and he was right. It's Kenobi. And if it's yours favorite too, that's wonderful. Alex says, think that's why Dune works for me, even if it isn't character moments. It's world building and politics. Another reason why I love Darth Plagueis. Yeah, the world building and politics in Dune is superb. I need to reread Dune before the new movie, which, by the way, the new trailer for Dune Part 2 looks amazing. It looks amazing. But I have just not. It looks amazing, but I have not reread it yet. But I really want to reread Dune because it was such a good book. All right. Let's see, where am I? When will you start the Kenobi novel in German? Every time I try to read it in German, I realize I'm just not that advanced enough in learning German. I'm trying, but it is hard because I'm not fluent in German. I've just been learning it in Duolingo. And I've learned a little bit of it, but not a terrible amount. Alex says, have you read the KOTOR comics by John Jackson Miller? I found the first 6 issues for really cheap at a bookstore, and so I have read only the first 6 issues. But I'm not a big comics guy. Like, I'm not kidding when I say this. That is the entirety of my comics that I own, the entirety of it, just those bind-ups. So I don't read a ton of comics. But that being said, the first one that I read, that 6-issue bind-up, was really good. So Derek Muth says, are you excited for Ahsoka coming out in a few months? And are you going to reread Heir to the Empire for a refresher to see what Filoni does with it? That's what I'm planning to do. Okay, so I have been trying to convince my best friend who I do the Star Wars podcast, Two Sons of Tatooine. I've been trying to convince him to read for the first time the old Thrawn trilogy so that he's prepared for Ahsoka, and we can talk about that. He just won't do it. He's not a reader. And he occasionally will read Star Wars books, but he's just not a big reader. But I'm trying to get him to do that. And I intend to reread it eventually, but I don't think I'm going to get it in time for Ahsoka. Because anytime I reread a novel, I am taking up the space of a new novel that I could read. And I want to read as many books as I can before I die. And that means not rereading unless it's like absolutely necessary. So it's hard to justify it anytime. So sorry, but maybe I will eventually. But it's a good plan. It's a good plan. That's smart. Maybe I should do that because that would help with views when the show comes out. Oh, maybe I should do that. Hymns are beautiful. Oh, you gave me a super chat. Thank you. You. That is 2 times you've done that. It says I'm still excited for you to read Divergent, and I will read it. I will read it. My current plan, just so you know this, so you can hold me to it. My current plan is to do it January, February, March. That's my current. We'll see if that works out well. Sometimes I have to push things back or stuff, but that's my current plan. That way I can get to them, get them read and reviewed. But we'll see if. But that's my current plan. So hold me to that. Well, maybe not hold me to that, but at least remind me that that's what I said. Jason Fraser, and thank you so much. Hymns are beautiful. That was very kind of you to give that again. Jason Fraser says, I like your videos. Thanks for answering my questions. Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad to engage and get more people into reading. And even if I have to re-answer things often, it's good because that means people have all these questions and I love to help them out. Great Books Guy. Hey, Jonathan, where should I go next in Star Wars Legends? Thus far, I've read the Thrawn trilogy, Shadows of the Empire, and Darth Plagueis. Well, if you want to explore the post-Return of the Jedi universe, which is where the Thrawn trilogy was, then I recommend reading the Jedi Academy trilogy, the X-Wing novels, I, Jedi, and then going to not Splinter, Spectre of the Past, Vision of the Future, which is the Hand of Thrawn duology. Those are the essential post-Return of the Jedi books in that era, and in the order I mentioned. There are other books, the Corellian trilogy, that is fine. There are a few other trilogies that are fine, but that's that post. If you wanted to get some prequel storytelling, Cloak of Deception, I think, is great. Outbound Flight is fantastic, and now that you've read the Thrawn trilogy, Outbound Flight will work for you probably. And then trying to think of other things. Of course, I'll always recommend Kenobi, but that's what I always do. So I hope that answers your question. Alex says Kenobi is a top 10 for sure. Yes, absolutely. Dizzy Dale says, I love the first Dune book. The second one, not so much. I agree. The second and third were so disappointing, especially with how great the first one is. And a lot of people say, well, that's the whole point of the series, was for books 2 to come out and for you to understand the rise and fall of Paul Atreides. And I'm like, I get it, but I like what happens in Dune, and I don't like what happens in Dune Messiah. That was really frustrating. That being said, we knew this. The hardcore Dune fans knew this, but it finally broke to general fans recently that they're going to do that Denis Villeneuve wants to do a third film that is just Dune Messiah, because he did the first book Dune as 2 movies, and then to make the third movie in the trilogy Dune Messiah. And while I get that, I like that, and I of course want more Dune movies, so I'll say yes. I'm gonna be sad when the trilogy ends, because that's such a sad ending. The chat just jumped. Sorry about that. I'm gonna try to find it. Alex says, I gotta read the Dune trilogy you reviewed before the most recent trilogy set before the OG novel before I can reread Dune, but I should have enough time before part 2 comes out. Yeah, they're decently sized. The prequel trilogy, the House Atreides, House Harkonnen, House Carino, is about 600 pages in paperback, but I think you can read them fairly quickly in time for they because they're like only set like 40 50 actually I think it's 40 years initially, and by the end of the trilogy it's only about like 15 years before, so you're really getting the big setup for the events of Dune, and it should make the new movie, particularly part 2, really valuable to you, I would think. Jason Fraser says, I'm reading Force Collector as I'm going through the canon timeline. Yes, Force Collector, that was a book that I really enjoyed when it came out, but it came out right before Rise of Skywalker, and it had these ideas of revisiting moments in each of the Star Wars movies, and I thought that is brilliant. I hope, and since it was the journey to the Rise of Skywalker, I was hoping it's gonna be part of the Rise of Skywalker storyline, is that they'd revisit things from each and every movie, and that like Rey would have the same ability that she'd touch something and see that flashback. That is not where they went with the movie, and I was kind of disappointed. And he was told, Kevin Shenick, who wrote that book, he wrote an ending and then was told, you can't do this ending because the movie ending is the same, so we need you to go back and rewrite it to be different. What was his ending? Because I cannot imagine that it was the same as the movie. Like, I really want to know what that ending was. That was part of the big selling point of the book, was, oh, they told me to change the ending because I got the same ending as them. So, but it's an entertaining book. Kimberly says, hi, Jonathan. Love your channel. Hello, Kimberly. Great to see you. Alex says the KOTOR comics are worth it. Well, if they're anything like the first 6 issues that I read, they'll definitely be worth it. Great Books Guy says, excited to see you picked up Red Mars. Yes, I recently purchased the book Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson, and I intend to read it because I just read 3 amazing science fiction novels, like back to back to back, with The Calculating Stars and with the novel Mars, and with one of the book that I won't say because it's my review hasn't come out yet for it. But I read 3 banger science fiction novels, and it gets me excited for this kind of exploring space and exploring going to another planet, the business behind it, all that kind of stuff. I'm really excited about that. Lazy Fishy says, I recommend the Jedi Academy trilogy if you want to continue from the Tron trilogy. I agree. Says, if you guys love the prequel trilogy, put Darth Plagueis high on your TBR. I'm glad you guys are all recommending things together. That's great. You're all giving great recommendations. That one guy named Raimi says, speaking of the Thrawn trilogy, have you seen the fan adaptation of Heir to the Empire by Darth Angelus? If you're talking about the animation thing, I've seen like a clip of it. I am not a fan of fan films. Like it's just something that's just weird to me. It's like if you're gonna make something be part of the actual product, like with reviewers, you're reviewing the product, so it's different. But fan films, it's just never been my niche, so I just haven't watched it. But it looked impressive for what they're putting out. It's very impressive. So Raffinetti says, congrats on the 3,000. Thank you. It says Shadowhunter is such an underrated book in the prequel era. Lazy Fishy said, yes. That is one of the, someone was asking earlier, the Legends books I haven't gotten to. That's one of the few remaining ones. Let's see where I am. Alex says, great books. Oh wait, I already read that. Hang on. Alex says, Corellian required to know who the heck Thraken is in New Jedi Order. That's true. He doesn't play. I thought Thraken was more involved in Legacy of the Force than he is Fate or New Jedi Order. I guess he is. I guess he's involved. But Lazyfish says, and Thrawn duology books. Yeah. Derek Muth says, I just started the Jedi Academy trilogy. Pretty excited, but I'm a completionist. So the amount of stuff I'm going to have to get through in this New Republic timeline is somewhat daunting. Yes, I agree. It can be daunting, but if you're patient and you're willing to read a lot, it's totally worth it. They pay off a lot there. Hymns are beautiful. Oh, another super chat. That's so kind of you. Thank you. Says, almost done with Pet Cemetery, and King is scary. I just read my first Stephen King book. What? Yes, I just read my first Stephen King book, and that review will be on the channel eventually. That's all I'll say about it because I don't want to reveal too much. But thank you so much for the super chat. Raffinetti says, I'm currently going through the point of view book. From a certain point of view book for Empire Strikes Back. Got my favorite short story in that collection. Stay awesome. I only read one in that collection so far, and that was the one with Ray Sloan, Seeing Vader by John Jackson Miller, because I'm such a John Jackson Miller fan. But I was not a big fan of how they marketed that book, and so I haven't really read it yet, but I'll have to read it before the Return of the Jedi one comes out, because that one comes out, I think, in October, I believe. October, I'm pretty sure. So I'll read that then. Great Books Guy says, any interest in other book series like the Ian Fleming James Bond books or the Aubrey Martin series or even Horatio Hornblower? I would love to read Horatio Hornblower because I watched the TV show when I was little and it was so entertaining. And the book series I'm reading right now called Honor Harrington by David Weber is basically like Horatio Hornblower set in space. So I'd love to get into those. Ian Fleming Bond books, I think I'd enjoy them, and they're pretty short. I'm trying to get into new genres when I can, but I also know that I have the genres that my audience likes. Oh, hymns are beautiful. Another super chat says, sometimes King's anti-Christian views are obvious. That I have noticed that. And you also said he's not an atheist, but is wary of evangelicals. I've noticed that in his writing as well. It is pretty palpable. Alex says, yeah, the most recent trilogy is somehow a year before the OG Dune novel, so I'll see if that's any good. Yeah, that one, I was like, you did the whole trilogy, and it's actually going to be a tetralogy because you have it's called a trilogy because they released it initially as the Heir, or the Duke of Kaladin, Lady of Kaladin, and Heir of Kaladin, but then they just added the book that's coming out later this year, Princess of Dune, which is about Irulan and Shani. It's about the both of them set in the same time period. So is it a tetralogy? Is it a trilogy that added an extra book? I'm not sure. We'll see. But I am interested to read that one. But I'm almost like that's almost a little too close. You're getting a little too close there. But we'll see. Alex says, Derek, yeah, it is. But if you read it all, it's pretty rewarding when you get to New Jedi Order because most will be referenced. You know what can be absolutely skipped is the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy. Is referenced nowhere except in the episode 2 Young Adult Adventures. That Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy was hard to get through, but I'm glad I read it because I was able to say, hey, I actually think Book of Boba Fett's better than this trilogy. Book with Many Covers says Sylvian Nuevo, The Temis Files are good sci-fi books. I've heard that, and I've seen him on panels because I'm a big Del Rey fan, and Del Rey always at San Diego Comic-Con does these panels, and they usually put them on YouTube where it's like, what's new from Del Rey? And he was on several of them. He wrote The Temis Files, and he has some other books coming out, and he's a fun guy, so I'm interested to read those. Dirk Muth says, good to know. Thanks, Alex. I remember reading Darth Plagueis and being astounded by all the references. That book is packed with Easter eggs, and I love it when authors do that. I do too. And that is just James Luceno's writing style. Some authors, like Luceno and Zahn and Kevin Anderson, they pack, and even Michael Stackpole to an extent, but those authors pack as many references as they can into their books, particularly Luceno. And then some authors I've read, and they barely have any in there. One author who packed quite a lot of references in recently was Mike Chen when he wrote Brotherhood. That book has a lot packed in there, reference-wise. So, Plagueis is insane with connections. But New Jedi Order is a whole other level. Characters, planets, events, reference, and impact of the series. You can read New Jedi Order without Bantam, but if you miss out on so much payoff and satisfaction. Exactly right. New Jedi Order is like a final season of a big series. Is it a final season? I would say I would call it multiple seasons of a series. And the hardcover books are the season finales and premieres, and the paperbacks are like the middle of the season. That's I think I wouldn't call it this overall finale because you still have Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, but it's like a multi-season arc of storytelling that also pays off previous arcs. That's how I would describe it. Let's see where I am. The one guy named Raimi says, I'm going on vacation soon and want to take a novel with me. I started reading Tatooine Ghost, but didn't finish it, but also want to read Spectre of the Past. What do you recommend? Well, Spectre of the Past is phenomenal. I love it. It's one of my favorites. There are 3 characters who are trying to be one character, which is hilarious and fantastic and great to read. So I will highly recommend that. Tatooine Ghost is usually pretty boring. Most people say it's not one of Troy Denning's most loved books. Some people love it, but most don't. So I would go with Spectre of the Past. And as long as you've read the prerequisites, because I read that without having read I, Jedi, and I was totally lost on a few things. But then I understood it because Zahn does a good job of filling you in when necessary. So no edit book reviews. I gotta jump off here. Thank you for all the excellent videos. Congrats on 3,000. Looking forward to seeing your channel grow. Oh, thanks so much. That's really kind of you. I hope your channel grows too, because you put out great content. And please, if you have the opportunity, please put out your review of Vector Prime, because I'll be interested to see your thoughts on it. Great Books Guy says, any interest in setting a goal one day to complete reading all the award winners like the Hugo Nebula? Not in my initial plan, because I usually disagree with the award winners. I usually end up not liking award-winning books. That being said, maybe I could someday, but I'm not sure that I would. But maybe we'll see. It might just be something that I just happen upon it as I read certain books, but I haven't sought out the Hugo or Nebula winners necessarily. Although I've seen nominated for the Hugo Award, nominated for the Nebula Award, that type of thing in multiple places. I'm making sure I didn't skip anything. Let's see where I am. Raffinetti says, given your channel's purpose, have you ever been given a Star Wars book for free by the editors for the purpose of review or any book in general? Talking about Star Wars, no, has not happened yet. I have had interactions with the editors, with one of the editors at, it was at Del Rey, but now they're at Random House Worlds. But no, I have not been given free books yet. Although that would be good because I would still be honest, but it would be easier for me to get them. However, when they give out books, oftentimes it's an e-arc, and I don't really read ebooks, but there are times where I make exceptions. So I might do that for the Star Wars books. But generally, I do physical books only, and so occasionally they'll send physical arcs to people. But we'll see if that ever happens. But with other publishers, yes, there is a publisher, Baen, who I work with quite often, and the Baen publisher has worked with me several times. They've sent me ebooks. They send me ebooks every month, although I usually don't use them because, again, I'm not an ebook reader. But they've sent me those, and they've set up author interviews that I've done with Baen people before, including one that's happening next week. Haha. We'll go into the announcing that tomorrow when I put up the what books are coming out or what videos are coming out next week. But the that hasn't happened with me for Star Wars or Star Trek, but it has happened with Baen, is the short answer for that. Alex says Tatooine Ghost is okay. I like that the story, while being an excuse for prequel connections, allows it to make sense for why Leia would name her youngest son Anakin, finally forgiving her birth father. Yes, that is a good answer. Jason Frazier says, I have read both Star Wars timelines. I prefer Legends. Lazy Fishy says, only canon book I have read is Brotherhood and Ahsoka. Got High Republic and Lost Stars on my shelf, though. Lots of people love Lost Stars, so I hope you enjoy it. High Republic, I still hold that High Republic is the closest thing to the New Jedi Order that we've ever had in Star Wars in publishing, because of the scope and the types of characters and stuff like that. But it's not a one-for-one comparison. But that's the best answer I would give for that. But I hope you enjoy them because I love both timelines. As you can see, I have one timeline here and one timeline here. I have lots of books from them. They take up almost an entire shelf, top to bottom each. Not a whole shelf, top to bottom each, but mostly. And they'll eventually take up once I have completed the collections. And so I think they're both valuable, but they also, as I put in my videos before, there's pros and cons to both. So let's see. Where was I? Hymns Are Beautiful says, there's a Goodwill used bookstore near me now. I bought around 20 books since it opened a month ago. Cheap prices. There's also a Mennonite thrift store near me, 50 cents for a paperback. That's great. That's fantastic prices. There are Goodwills near me, but they almost never have books. And if they do have books, they're just not books I'm interested in. There are some, I apologize if you hear the noise happening in the other room. There are some used bookstores near me. I have a Second and Charles, which is reasonable. They're not cheap, but they're reasonable for used books. And then there's a bookstore called not Gibbons Books, that's where I used to, but it's called Judy Buggs Books, and that bookstore is really cheap, but they don't have many books, but they're really cheap is the nice thing. And then of course they have Barnes and Noble. So that's, and then sometimes I don't do this often, but occasionally I'll be like, I need this book now, I must have it. I'll go to ABE Books for that. Great Books Guy says, favorite Agatha Christie books so far, favorite Trek books so far. Favorite Agatha Christie is by far Crooked House. Crooked House is amazing, but Sparkling Cyanide is a close second. Sparkling Cyanide was fantastic. For Star Trek, that's a long answer. I'll give 3 answers. One I'll give is the Prey trilogy. For a standalone, I'll say it's Takedown, and I will also mention Full Circle by Kirsten Beyer for Voyager. Those are best Trek books, probably. Tarek Myth says, Brotherhood was honestly a disappointment for me. Didn't think Anakin and Obi-Wan were done right, and I don't remember everything well, so I don't think the plot resolved at all. It did, but I understand if you didn't like it. For me, it was perfect. It perfectly meshed episode 2 Anakin and Obi-Wan with the Clone Wars Anakin Obi-Wan. I felt that mesh was perfectly done, and I liked the way that Anakin interacts with the young characters in the book. I liked the way that Obi-Wan deals with the political situations in the book. It felt very Clone Wars. It felt very prequel. It felt, I use this sometimes, but I'll say, for me, the ultimate episode 1 novel is Cloak of Deception, because it just feels like episode 1 when you read it. The book that to me is episode 2 is Brotherhood, because it just feels like episode 2 so much. And then for episode 3, that would either be Labyrinth of Evil or Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. So, the chat keeps jumping. Alex says, I found the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson at a yard sale, unopened and for free. So I took it because I hear the author's name a lot. Oh, Brandon Sanderson is my favorite author of all time. Stormlight Archive is fantastic. If you have, Way of Kings, the first book, it's daunting, it's huge, but it's so worth it. It's so good. There's a reason it gets so much praise because it's very good. Um, uh, let's see. Raffinay says, you mentioned enjoying Kenobi by John Dexter Miller. I started it, but stopped at 45%. I was struggling with the pacing and found it difficult to get attached to the characters. I'm open to others' opinions. I can understand because it is a slow novel, but man, does it pick up at the end, and it makes everything worth it to me. But I understand that it's slow for some people, but it is a book that works just perfectly for me as a reader. Like I love it so much. Let's see. Alex says, I found it very easy to fall in love with new characters of Kenobi. Yes. Annalene Caldwell, love her. One of my favorite characters. Orrin Galt, he's great. The kids, the kids are the kids of both Annalene, her son and daughter, and also the kids of Orrin Galt, his son and daughter. They're funny. And then the Zeltrin woman, I'm blanking on her name, but she's delightful, as are some of the other characters in there. So I really enjoyed them. And it's great because it's not Kenobi's perspective. So you're seeing everyone react to him. That's what makes it so fun. Great. Alex says, but it also makes sense given the time. Oh, hang on. Skipped a little bit. Let me go back. Alex says, it's written like a Western. Kenobi isn't the main character. He's like the mysterious cowboy who comes into town. I really enjoyed, Lazy Fishy says, I really enjoyed Brotherhood. I still hope they do an Anakin and Ahsoka book that Mike Chen can write from your lips to the editor's ears. Absolutely. Brian M says, I just finished Lost Stars and agree with your take. Didn't feel very Star Wars with the language. Is her writing in Bloodlines similar? It's much better in Bloodlines because when she writes young adult, she writes differently than she does when she writes adult. So her adult books, Bloodline and Master and Apprentice, feel like traditional Star Wars books. Bloodline, a lot of people have struggles because it just feels like the sequel trilogy because it's connecting to the sequel trilogy, but it's very entertaining, and I think it's much better than her young adult. And I still like Leia, Princess of Alderaan. I think it's the best young adult novel, but Lost Stars just doesn't entirely work for me. Alex says, but it also makes sense given the time placement. He needs to be hiding, so it can't be overly action heavy. It works for me really well, not to mention fleshing out the Tuskens. Yes, it does flesh them out. Great Books Guy says, do you use any editing software for the BookTube channel? Yes, I do. I use Movavi, which for a while I was the only person I knew who used it, and now I know 2 people who use it. But Movavi is pretty good. I'm gonna have to get a new computer eventually, and I'll have to buy a new one. Not only a new computer but new software, which will be really sad. Raffinay says, I'm gonna start over from scratch in a couple of reads. Yeah, maybe read something else. Read something else in the meantime so you don't feel too bogged down by it. But it's one of those, whenever I don't enjoy a book, I just say I don't know till the end what I think, so I just keep plowing through the book until the end, because that one's one where it's worth it at the end. Jason Fraser says, as I was going through all your Star Wars book videos, I saw a few when you were sick. I appreciate your dedication. Yes, I got some flack for making those when I was sick. But when I started teaching, I was warned I'd be sick a lot my first year. And I was sick for about 2 months straight. I was just sick for 2 months. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. It was October and November of last year that it happened. And I just powered through it because I needed to keep working and I wanted to keep the YouTube channel going. But I was miserable for like 2 months last year. And so I'm hoping going back to school this year does not happen. Let's see where I am. Derek Muth says, considering how expensive airport, oh wait, where did that come from? Hang on. Let's see. As I was going through, nope. Considering how much expensive airport prices normally are, I'm not sure where that's coming from. It says, oh, you guys are talking back and forth. Alex says, I progressively hated Bounty Hunter Wars. Felt like work. I understand that. It says, I started Kenobi right after having read Padawan by Kirsten White, and maybe I had Obi-Wan indigestion. Obi-Wan by Kirsten White was not great. Padawan was not great. Sad to say. So maybe maybe you need to give it time because I think Kenobi's much better. Although some people in the comments section confuse the two. So I got people saying, "How can you say you like Kenobi when it has all this stuff?" And I said, "That's not Kenobi, that's Padawan." So uh, Alex says, ended up throwing hard merchandise against the wall in a video by accident. Talking about it upset me more. And yeah, I feel the grind. YouTube does help me push through the slogs, though, because of content. It does. Having goals and making sure that I have to finish everything absolutely absolutely keeps me reading, and I really appreciate that. That's why I tell people, set a goal that's like a monthly goal and then set a yearly goal and make sure that you hit it, and if you do that, you will enjoy it much more. I'm only going to stay around for a few more minutes, so I'm going to try to catch up. That one guy named Rami says, have you read the Lord of the Rings books and seen the films? If yes, do you have a favorite? I have a least favorite. Did not like the book, the Fellowship of the Ring. I think the movies are all masterpieces. Personal favorites, I love the Two Towers, and I love the Return of the King, specifically because of the Rohan storyline between those two movies and books. I actually like the movies more than the books, but that's just me. But I think the Two Towers book was pretty good, and the Return of the King book was also pretty good. But the movies are just masterpieces. One guy named Rami says, I've only seen the films. The first book is a slog to get through, but then books 2 and 3 are worth it. But the movies are really good adaptations of them. Raffinate says, if somebody were to write a Plo Koon novel and his Wolfpack novel, who would you pick to write it? A couple of options. One would be Mike Chen, because he understands the prequels really well, I think. I think that also Delilah Dawson could probably do it, although she wouldn't be my first pick. John Jackson Miller could do it, but not necessarily the best person for the job. Paul S. Kemp, he hasn't written in the last decade for Star Wars. I think he could do it if he wanted to, although he usually does darker stuff. And maybe Christy Golden, but she doesn't write for Star Wars anymore because she doesn't write them anymore. So that's sad. Says, great book, Sky. Have you read the C.S. Lewis Space Trilogy? That is on my list to read one day, but haven't read it yet. Someone else says, I love a Plo Koon novel. Alex says, I'm going to get ready for work, but congrats on the new milestone. Don't comment often, but enjoy the videos, at least some of the books, and interested in your Dune reviews. Have a great day. Oh, thank you so much. That's perfect timing. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this live stream. It's great that we've been able to have 3,000 subscribers. Can't wait to have even more and to put out more content. Can't wait to interact with you guys in future videos. I have some interesting videos coming up in the months of July and August that I'm interested in seeing your takes on. So thank you, everyone. Good talking to all of you.